So let's begin by handling a couple of these tracings. All of you still need to take your lab final and memorizing all of the parts of the kidney as you, in the order that they belong, is a good way to memorize the material, but also memorizing the tracings. So let's talk about the path of blood flow through the kidney. Blood is going to start in the renal artery. And let me emphasize for you that the only place in all of anatomy where you will find that the arteries are blue is the pulmonary arteries. Now, I know that you learned the beginning of the pulmonary artery when you were learning the cardiovascular anatomy. But then, like the next week, you learned respiratory anatomy. And I hope you can connect the idea that that blue artery, that is the pulmonary trunk pulmonary arteries, goes to the blue arteries in the lungs. And then the red veins in the lungs come back to the red veins attached to the left atrium, right? But that is the only place where things are backwards. It is really common for students to look at kidney blood vessels that are red and call them renal veins. Please don't do that, okay? So the renal artery is red, and blood is going to go from the renal artery, which is a pretty big artery. It is going to go up the interlobar arteries. Okay, what's segmental arteries? Technically, there are also segmental arteries. We just don't hold you responsible for them in AP 120. Okay? The interlobar arteries, that's a good name for them because inter means between, lobar, between the lobes. It is not obvious to you, but actually every kidney is made up of what are known as lobes, and they are these cone-shaped structures called the renal pyramids and the overlying cortex. So the interlobar arteries literally go up the renal columns, which are those pink, lighter pink spaces between the lobes. And then arcuate arteries that make an arch over the top of every pyramid, and then cortico-radiate arteries. I love that name. They're in the cortex. They radiate up into the cortex like some kid drawing the rays of the sun. So cortico-radiate arteries. Now from there, things get really super tiny. And so that's why we've got those kidney boards where it's got a whole kidney and then just one lobe of the kidney and then really small. The afferent arterioles are little tiny arterioles that take blood into the capillary called the glomerulus. The glomerulus is a little, it's a capillary bed that someone just rolled up into a ball and stuck inside of Bowman's capsule. That's the glomerulus. And then blood comes out of the glomerulus in the efferent arteriole. And from the efferent arteriole, it goes into a second set of capillaries called the peritubular capillaries. For those of you keeping track, the fact that there's one capillary bed directly attached to a second capillary bed makes this another portal system, right? First portal system was the anterior pituitary. Second portal system was the liver. Third portal system, boom, here in the kidney. And then from the peritubular capillaries, the blood goes out in veins, but basically the way it came in. The cortico-radiate veins, the arcuate veins, interlobar veins, renal vein, right? So let's see if we can see that. Well, we can see some of it. Here's the renal artery, right? And then we've got the interlobar artery, and then we've got the arcuate artery, and then things get small. The cortico-radiate arteries are all of these that radiate up into the cortex, right? And then things get super small, afferent arteriole, glomerulus, efferent arteriole, peritubular capillaries. And then things come back out the way they go in. So, sorry, I really got to change this image. Another correct name for the cortico-radiate artery is the interlobular artery, but I would rather we not use that term because I think interlobar and interlobular, I think they're just too much alike. Okay. Now, a couple of things. First of all, For those of you who hate it when I pronounce it afferent and efferent, I don't blame you, because it is also very correct to pronounce it afferent and efferent. It's just that when I'm lecturing, the word afferent and the word efferent really sound a lot alike. So I generally will say afferent to emphasize that that is the word that begins with the letter A, and efferent to emphasize that's the term that begins with the letter E. And I want you to recognize that in the path of blood flow, the afferent comes before the efferent, and in the alphabet, the letter A comes before the letter E. So we got that going for us. All righty. So I should change these, but this is the cortical radiate artery. The afferent arteriole's got a larger diameter going into the glomerulus. The efferent arteriole's got a smaller one. All of that network is peritubular capillary. Then it comes back out through the cortical radiate vein, arcuate vein, interlobar vein, etc. So you should be able to answer a question like this. Blood just left the interlobar artery. Where did it go next? It went into the arcuate artery. If I say blood is in the interlobar artery, where did it come from? Well, it came from the renal artery. Blood just left the glomerulus. Where did it go next? Into the efferent arteriole. Where did it just come from? The afferent arteriole, right? So make sure you can answer these kinds of questions. This is what the kidney looks like through a microscope. I think sometimes my students feel a little bit frustrated as they are looking at our models and our images of the kidney because things are complicated. Well, heck, it's right there in the name of the tubules. Another word for complicated is convoluted, right? Convoluted means it's difficult to trace. The proximal and distal convoluted tubules have got that word convoluted right in their name. But I would like to give you an appreciation for the fact that even though the images that you're looking at seem really complicated, compared to the real thing, they have been dramatically simplified. So this is what the kidney actually looks like. This is a glomerulus. It's in a glomerular capsule. Some of this is proximal convoluted tubule, some of it's distal convoluted tubule. I don't know which is which. This is the boundary between the cortex and the medulla. This is medulla. This is part of the renal pyramid. So these are nephron loops and collecting ducts down here, right? And if it looks like someone took a bowl of spaghetti and just cut across it and put it on a microscope slide, you're not far off. So just thought that would make you appreciate that the artist who did these images really did a very good job of depicting it. I want you to notice that in the model in lab, they depict the peritubular capillaries this way, in which case you might wonder, why are they called peritubular capillaries, right? Well, actually, the peritubular capillaries look like these red and blue blood vessels right here. They're called peritubular capillaries because they literally are wrapping around all of the tubules, proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule. That's why they're called peritubular capillaries. They're depicted like this on that model so that instructors like me can go ahead and put a little piece of tape on there and go, what are these? But the peritubular capillaries are really wrapped around the tubules. So you know the path of blood flow. Great. That is one of the tracings you need to know. Blood flows through all of those blood vessels. Blood does not go directly into any of these tubules that we're about to talk about. As blood goes through this little guy, the glomerulus, or that little guy, the glomerulus, as it goes through there, it is going to kind of get squeezed, and the watery part of the plasma is going to be spraying out into this thing, Bowman's capsule, and will get sent on a journey through the nephron, okay? The nephrons are the functional units of the kidney. If you have only 50% of your nephrons currently working, you only have 50% of your kidney function. We measure kidney function not by how big your kidneys are or how much they weigh, not by how much blood flows through them. No, we measure how much kidney function you have by how many of your nephrons are working. So, the nephron structure. Nephron structure starts here at the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle's got two sides. It has got this thing, the glomerulus. The glomerulus is the capillary that's depicted in red in here. And imagine that the capillary, the glomerulus, is going to be like my hand, okay? My creepy hand, right? Now, imagine if I took my hand and I pushed it into a big bubblegum bubble. There's a bubblegum bubble right here, okay? And I push my hand into it. If I did, part of that bubblegum would be attached to my fingers now, but part of it would still be out here. That's the way the glomerulus is organized. The glomerulus is here, it's like my fingers, and the bubblegum bubble, some of it's on the outside of my fingers, and some of it's out here, okay? The part of the bubblegum bubble that's here, still attached to the glomerulus, that is going to be the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. The part that's out here is the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule. The glomerular capsule is also called Bowman's capsule. In order for any of the watery part of our plasma to get from in here where the blood is out to here, it has to travel through three different layers. It travels through the simple squamous epithelium that makes the structure of the capillary. It travels through basement membrane, and then it travels through the visceral layer of Bowman's capsule, which is also a type of squamous epithelium, and those cells are known as podocytes. And then it'll be like springing out here into this space in Bowman's capsule, and it'll get caught, boom, by the parietal layer of Bowman's capsule. And from there, it'll get sent into the tubules. And this right here, it's important for you to know, that is the beginning of the proximal convoluted tubule. That's the beginning of the proximal convoluted tubule. So here you see it in context. Here's proximal convoluted tubule, and it is indeed convoluted, right? From the proximal convoluted tubule, things will go into the nephron loop. It has a descending limb and an ascending limb. Make sure you remember that the descending happens first as the fluid kind of goes down into the renal pyramid, and then the fluid goes back up, so ascending limb of the nephron loop. Then it goes through the distal convoluted tubule, and after that, it goes through the collecting duct. So the path of fluid flow starts here at Bowman's capsule, then proximal convoluted tubule, then descending limb of the nephron loop. Remember, the arcuate artery and vein, that is the boundary between the cortex and the medulla. So this is down here in the renal pyramid. Descending limb of the nephron loop, ascending limb of the nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. By the way, if you ever get confused, the distal convoluted tubule is always the one that has one edge connected to the collecting duct, right? So what is that? Well, it's attached to the collecting duct, so this is, sorry, I'm in the way. This is the distal convoluted tubule. The distal convoluted tubule is attached to the collecting duct on one end and the ascending limb of the nephron loop on the other end, and then the descending limb of the nephron loop. I'm going backwards, so that's all proximal convoluted tubule, right? After that, where do things go? Down the collecting duct, and it will get captured by the minor calyx. From the minor calyx, it'll go into a major calyx. From the major calyx, it'll go into the renal pelvis. From the renal pelvis, it goes into the ureter. From the ureter into the urinary bladder. From the urinary bladder, it will leave you by going out the urethra. All right, we'll start there at the beginning of the next video.